We have this thing in society where we would rather blame human beings' failure than system problems, which is kind of odd. You would think that people would rather blame inanimate things rather than human beings. But it's a failure to execute. And the result is we reorg our way to failure. And it fixes nothing. We got to stop the reorgs and we got to change the mindset, and that actually will fix the issues that we're reorging for. Check out Brant Rant to hear more. Hi, Brant Cooper here. I'm fortunate I get to travel around the world speaking with startup founders, investors, ecosystem developers. I've learned a lot in my travels. I've got some stories, and I have some thinking that I love to share. Welcome to Brant's Rant. So I wanted to dive in a little deeper on this 4 phases of retooling the company, reinventing, reimagining organizations based upon the case phases. I'll go even further in depth, but I want to kind of, talk about the philosophy of this a little bit. In my opinion, maybe just purely from my own biased point of view, working with a bunch of these organizations, I find that, a lot of these organizations, big companies, feel like they need to change. They feel like there's something more fundamentally going on here than just economic problems or supply chain problems, or a lot of these organizations will sort of admit to their reliance on stock prices and sort of this what everybody calls short-termism. I almost think that the short-termism is a response rather than the root cause, which is kind of interesting because that's sort of what everybody blames. And we have this thing in our society where we would rather blame human beings for their shortcomings, for their failures, than looking at things from a more systematic point of view, where the choices are often difficult and where people can believe that they're making the right choices, but based upon the knowledge that they have, but they end up being the wrong ones, or that it's so complex that they choose something that maybe they think benefits themselves because they truly believe that that's how the market dictates that that's the right thing to do, which is, kind of hilariously bad. But I just, I tend to, I guess, give people the benefit of the doubt. And I think a lot of leaders are a bit confused and they are being disrupted themselves, and they're not exactly sure what's going on, and they're not exactly sure what to do about it. And they have a tremendous amount of pressure in the fact that they are responsible for the well-being of tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of human beings, while also under pressure from board members and from the stock market and from the news media's daily tracking of the frickin' stock market, which is probably the most ridiculous thing in our society. This percentage of people that benefit from the daily fluctuation of the stock market is so low that there's just absolutely no excuse why media pays so much attention to it. And even if just media stopped paying so much attention to it, you would probably see the C-suite pay less attention to it. And yet it's just one of these things that, again, systemically, they feed each other. And it's just absurd. A couple of the behaviors that happen. So people understand that we're going through this digital transformation, right? It's from the industrial age to the digital age. But they view that as being, okay, like, yeah, we got to digitize our products. Like, oh, I got to build a mobile app. And the digital transformation is so much more about mindset than it is about digitizing the products. And there's so much more work that needs to be done in digitizing core back office functions and core business processes than about, adding a freaking smart component to your refrigerator. I think people are really confused. And what this ends up happening is that these organizations just go through continuous rework. So continuous reorganizations is the corporate response to endless disruption. And the reorgs are driven by not hitting numbers, or about just being able to see that divisions and departments and different parts of the company are not functioning well, and they're not functioning well together. And even organizations that have adapted Agile have similar problems, because many times they adapt Agile to reinforce the existing behavior. So David Bland, who wrote, sort of the latest and greatest book on experimentations, did this fun March Madness around sort of innovation frameworks, though it's not just innovation, and, sort of did the Sweet 16 around it. It was pretty funny. And in the, in the end, the two frameworks that made it to the finals was Scrum, so a very specific implementation of Agile, versus Waterfall, which is really sort of the old school project driven, calendar driven method of product development that a lot of Agile was supposed to replace. Though even that's too simplistic of a frame. I actually want to call it all Agile. I'm going to say define your sprints longer if everything is really well known, because there's other reasons why you should not do waterfall, in my opinion. But that's a separate rant, I think. But so it was funny. In the end, I guess it was a tie. They merged Scrum and Waterfall. David called that Scrum Fall, and I called it Scrum Fail, where we use Agile practices to reinforce old waterfall behavior. But anyway, I digress. What we find is, though, that even if we want to apply these new mindsets, this new way of thinking, we get stuck in these constant reorgs because we're not seeing the results that we want to see. And I guess I think that the problem, I guess I hate to pile on here, but, I think a lot of the problem stems from out of control success of the big consulting firms that charge ungodly amounts of money for very junior, inexperienced people. According to Matthew Stoller, who wrote Goliath on corporate consolidation, on corporate power, great book, I think. I loved it. And he has a great newsletter. He says that the cost to the government for the government hiring McKinsey for a recent college graduate is $3 million a year. Can you imagine? I mean, if that's the case, just absolutely extraordinary. And I think what happens is that if big consulting firms like McKinsey can make money hand over foot by not changing, then why are they going to change? And what's ironic to me is most of those big consulting companies suffer from the very same ills that they're counseling their customers on. And even though they maybe get it, they buy up these innovation shops and these agile and design thinking agencies, but they can't change because they're making too much money on the old way of doing things. It's such a mistake. And all of this is like too much strategy, and it's too much top-down bullshit. The fundamental change that has to happen in organizations is behavior change. Behavior change is brought on by practicing the behavior, practicing a new mindset, and demonstrating impact based upon those behaviors. And so it's exactly the opposite of top-down. Top-down is still required in order to say, yes, we're making the change. Top-down is required in order to define what the desired outcomes are. Top-down is required in order to organize the people that are going to become our champions and, put some teams together that should be acting as agile startup teams who are going to run the new program. So you do need some top-down stuff, but the fundamental behavior change, the fundamental change that has to happen in these corporations is ground up. We hire people because they're smart. We need to empower those people to go solve problems. And even if you have people that are working in pure core 100% execution roles, you put them on teams where they hold each other accountable for the 5 E's: empathy, exploration, evidence-informed decision-making, equilibrium, and ethics. If you have managers that have to sort of regulate all of those individuals for any behavior change, or even just for them to continue whatever it is they're doing now in the face of uncertainty that they all face, it just leads to failure, and it's all middle management that's only fighting fires. And you just create this cycle of failure that leads other people inside the organization to squeeze the juice out. They gotta reduce costs some other way, because the internal mechanisms of how people are functioning and interacting and collaborating and sharing information is falling apart. And so make no mistake about it, the increase in lobbying, the increase in corporate acquisitions, the increase in outsourcing, the increase in cheaper materials, all of this is driven by, in my opinion, by this fundamental change into the digital transformation from the industrial age, and companies not knowing how to deal with the digital age. And so being forced to use these old last-ditch execution-style minded principles in order to show any sort of benefit to Wall Street. And so short-termism ends up becoming a result of the uncertainty, not the cause of it. And so the phased approach is about getting the behavior change going at the beginning, kickstarting it. The acceleration comes from successfully driving impact so people can see the results, shining a light on that work so that the core business starts catching that they need to behave this way. Choosing places inside the company that you can do a more fundamental change because they are run by leaders that actually already get it, and so they want this fundamental change, or they're parts of the company that fundamentally have greater amounts of uncertainty, so need the exploration work and need the new mindset. Or maybe there are parts of the organization that are just failing and you need to learn whether to kill it or you try to save it. But so you're purposely choosing different parts of the organization to bring this mindset into. And you're using a group that maybe hopefully ends up becoming a center of excellence where they can provide coaching and consulting and even outside consultants and help in getting the mindset going inside the core business. And eventually what the core business establishes in the scaling phase is parts of the organization that are continue to operating probably only in execution mode, but they're starting to learn this other stuff. But there's what I call a docking station, sort of this incubator that's attached to the core business, run and funded by the core business, that is working on new revenue streams that have evidence of success, but not enough evidence to be rolled into the core business yet. This can't be a separate innovation group. It must be the core business that's doing this. You have to generate these successes. You have to have these cross-functional, interdisciplinary, different parts of the organization touching these projects, such that people are involved and leaders have a stake in the outcome. And that's actually what keeps them involved. And you're teaching those leaders new skills about how to use, sort of this mentoring instead of just managing, acting like a board of advisors, acting like a board of directors as investors. These are different skills that leaders can adopt. It's such a fallacy to think that these smart, accomplished people cannot adapt these skills. They need to apply that to their core business anyway. And so it's not that much for these people to understand that there's different levels of uncertainty, and so therefore they're applying these principles to a different degree. The core back office functions are changing the way they do financing. They change the way they're doing performance management and hiring and legal changes. They have to allow this new exploration work to go hand in hand with the execution work. And so the core functions actually become enablers. They're leaders in making this change. And this is happening during the scale phase. And eventually you reach this tipping point, and now that becomes this new behavior. And you enter this endure phase where now you're bringing the strategy along the very top of the corporation. You're evaluating future endeavors based upon a needs portfolio and not narrowly as a product portfolio here and acquisitions over here and new sales regions over here, but it's actually under one portfolio, a needs portfolio. Leadership now can change without those core fundamental practices being in place. The leaders that are in charge are fully on board with being vulnerable, self-aware, empowering others. And we see this across these organizations that have successfully put these leaders in place, and it changes the game. It really does. And so a lot of these leaders are going through the training to learn all of these different skills, but they're not given a specific way to implement it. And that's what CASE does. Kickstart, accelerate, scale, endure. Join me at brantcooper.com to talk more about disruption proof. Got a Slack channel you can join up on. We do talks. This year coming will be snippets from the book, and I've got sort of this entrepreneurial spirit book that if you pre-order, you can get that past books for free, as well as tools. So come to brantcooper.com and check it out. Until next time. Hey, thanks for listening to Brant's Rant. If we're choosing capitalism here as a society, then let's make it work for a better world. If you'd like to join me as we redefine capitalism for the 21st century, go to beatcoop.co/D4A. Also, if you have a pressing issue that you're facing in your innovation group, your product group, your startup, and want to join me on video, see the link below. Subscribe, like, see you next time.